the floor is open now for questions, contributions, and comments. If you have any, please kindly raise your hand up. I will call you to unmute yourself and turn on your video to ask your question or make your comment. So while we are waiting for the audience to articulate their question or make their contribution, I will start by asking a question to Professor Bota. She talked about the role of Ubuntu in articulating AI ethics. And I want you to maybe clarify that a little. Are you saying that we should articulate AI principles from the idea of Ubuntu? How can we actually incorporate Ubuntu into AI ethics? Thank you.
Thank you, Amara, for your question. Actually, I'm saying quite the opposite to that. So what I'm saying is that what we have in the literature at the moment, if we look at the kind of literature, and it was actually lovely to have Diana present her paper, because of course her paper fits in the second category of papers that I set out in my classification. But within the first set of literature that we find in AI ethics in or from or for Africa, we find this focus on principles, on indigenous principles like Ubuntu. And I'm using Ubuntu as an example because it's familiar to most of us here. But what I'm saying is, and perhaps I wasn't quite clear on that, I'm saying that most of the literature that focuses on these kinds of principles like Ubuntu, is a literature without teeth. So I gave the reasons why when you look at those particular works, that they pay lip service, if you like, to the concept, but they don't really show us what we can do with those principles. So it becomes kind of an empty gesture, and I'm saying it quite strongly now, an empty gesture to just paste Ubuntu on or any of the other indigenous principles and say, there we go, now we've solved the problem. My argument is that we're doing this uncritically. It's become a kind of knee-jerk reaction in much of the literature, and a lot of the literature that's not appearing in philosophy. So many other disciplines have taken these principles and then just use it as a kind of sticking plaster to solve the problem, but they don't really engage critically with the concepts. So my argument is we need to, first of all, be very careful in how we use concepts like Ubuntu if we're going to try and develop an AI ethics in or for from Africa. And then what we do need to do, and this is my particular interest in what I do in the second paper that I didn't talk about today, is try to say what other kinds of resources, and perhaps that's a problematic word to use, but let me use it. What other kinds of resources can we find within the African philosophical tradition that we can use to develop an African philosophical ethics that is responsive to the kinds of problems that Diana so beautifully set out for us today? That's where I'm going. So thank you for your question.
Okay, thank you for your response, Prof. Yulia, please unmute yourself and ask your question or make your contribution.
Yes, thank you. I have also a question for Catherine. I think it kind of rhymes with what you've just been answering to the first question. I was wondering, because you were perfectly right to criticize that the so-called Western approaches are dominated by certain powerful actors So how could we make sure if we try to define or redefine, as you said, in for or from Africa ethics, how that it's like a broad range of actors and it's like the right actors, if I can say this.
Okay, thank you for your question. Prof, please, you can respond.
Oh, Julia, you asked the most difficult question. I mean, it's really an important question that you've asked. How do we do this? How do we make sure that a broad range of voices are heard? And of course, it's really a very, very difficult question to answer because, of course, as I said, we are currently in a situation where there are certain dominant voices and other voices that are not heard. But I don't think we should forget that there are a number of amazing initiatives that are taking place all over the world where voices are being called together. I mean, this colloquium is perhaps one example where we really talk about the kinds of problems that we see. Here's just one example. I was lucky enough to go on behalf of my university to go and sign an agreement called the Rome Call for AI Ethics. And of course, I arrived in the USA going, huh, what is happening? And I was so particularly impressed with what kinds of amazing initiatives are being done all over the world. So there's one, for example, that is being done in that is happening in the USA, where they've put together a series of podcasts calling for approaches that are not Western and looking for I mean, the amazing theorists that are working there. So this is the Notre Dame AI Ethics Lab, where they put together a podcast where people from all over the world are contributing and saying these are different voices. So I think, and perhaps here I'm a bit of a Foucauldian in a strange sense, that we can make change here and now in the little things. So we might not necessarily see massive change happening. We might not be able to have these terribly loud voices, but the small voices, there's room for it. And the more small voices that we have, I think can contribute to the change that you're looking for. I'm not sure if that helps.
Thank you, Prof, for your response. Jaja, please unmute yourself and make your contribution or ask your question.
Good day, everyone. Thank you, Professor Catherine. And I really resonated with the paper you presented and the idea. I've always felt a certain way about, like you captured aptly, the lip service that we pay to African philosophies or ideologies when discussing AI ethics. But I think there is something that is missing from the contribution that you made, and it's the fact that the problem, it's not because really Africans have failed to, one of the issue that has not been captured is not because Africans have failed to flesh out what Ubuntu philosophy or other ideologies mean. I think we failed in the first instance by mapping the problem, like the particular issue that Africa faces and how it's different from the Western perspective. Now, Ubuntu philosophy can be categorized under what people see as relational autonomy, which has been pushed by feminist movement and communitarianism years ago. Now, when it's been relational autonomy is being discussed in the West, you see is a call for factoring social conditions or peculiar factors that affect especially marginalized groups is based on racism, with the Black people in America or Europe and how AI systems will affect them when it comes to, usage in policing and other like employment, recruitment and all those. But we do not have those same issues in Africa. And what we fail to do, we fail to map the problem. Since we failed to map the problem, we found it so difficult to take that leap on how to use Ubuntu philosophy or whatever ideologies to solve the problem. So I think mapping our problem, mapping what is that thing, the peculiar issue that we face will make it easier. Once we are able to map the problem, we'll see how Ubuntu philosophy can easily resolve that problem. And that's the contribution I want to make. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you for your contribution. Prof, do you have a comment to make here?
I would just like to say to Jaja, thank you so much. That is really a wonderful comment that you've made. Yeah, I think failure to map the problem is exactly it. I think if we need to go back and say, what is it that we're trying to do? As you so beautifully pointed out, I think important to look at issues that arise when we're talking about how feminisms and issues of racism are expressed within different milieus, and then of course saying, what are we doing with these concepts? Are we just sticking them on like sticking plasters and saying, you see, we've solved the problem? Or are we really trying to get down to the root, to the radix of the problem? That's a wonderful, wonderful comment that you've made. Thank you.
Thank you for your response. Chukwemeka, we'll take the last question for this part of the lecture. Chukwemeka, please mute yourself and ask your question or make your contribution. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, the presenters. My question goes to Dr. Diana Ofana. In the course of her presentation, she said, or maybe I didn't get her well, how AI has affected relationality. And then I want to know whether she's talking about the effects, positively or negatively. Although the way she presented it, it seems she's trying to say that AI has affected the relationality we find in Africa. But to me, I don't think, I beg to differ with her, because with the use of AI currently, it has promoted that African relationship and communion, whereby people these days could reach out to far people around the world that has never been done before. So I may like her to clarify her thoughts about how AI has affected the relationship we find in Afro-Communitarianism in her presentation. Thank you.
Thank you. Please, Dr. Diana, you can respond.
Thank you so much. You're correct. I wasn't just talking about my talk was not highlighting the positive effect, although I had done that in the paper. I just skipped it. I went straight to the problems. In terms of relationality, in as much as we could reach our relative, friends, colleagues, make businesses easy for people, we still have this effect of relationality, whereby a lot of people tend to be more robotic in their dealings with one another than human. With the same AI tools, people can still scam one another. You can still be in a room with your spouse, your family, and yet it feels like we are all in a cyber conference meeting where everybody is on their phones. So it's kind of, even in the family circle, if we are not intentional with the way we use AI tools, especially our mobile phones, we'll get to a point where we will not be able to have that relationship and that human form of relations we have with one another in Africa. So that's what I was referring to. I hope I'm able to answer your question.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Diana. The conversation can continue after the colloquium. So I think we still have a little time to accommodate one last question for this section. So Obicheku, please unmute yourself and ask your question or make your contribution. Be very brief so that we can end this section. Thank you. Obijeku, are you still here with us? It seems like Obijeku is not here. So once again, thank you to our speakers for your thought-provoking and insightful lecture. Thank you for your comments and your responses to the questions asked by the participants. And thank you for all those that asked questions and contributed to this session. Thank you. So